Which of these stories will you be talking about tomorrow? No sale. Occupy Oakland refuses to let Mayor Jean Quan apologize to its General Assembly, so she posts herself online.
What I wanted to say to you tonight is how deeply saddened I am about the outcome on Tuesday.
And then she tells Occupy Oakland it cannot stay in Ogawa Plaza overnight. The protester, his skull fractured by police, Scott Olsen, improves again.
Huge neurological improvement over what he was when he got here, but he's still having trouble articulating words. I anticipate that will improve.
Wall Street. Now we know why Bloomberg thought the cold weather would clean out the protests. Today, the cops took away the generators.
Our first two concerns, First Amendment and safety, and this was safety.
The smear resumes. Anonymous police sources say there are parts of Zuccotti Park too dangerous for them to go into called the ghetto. It's 26,000 square feet. This isn't downtown Calcutta. More midnight raids. Nashville changed the rules yesterday, run the protesters last night.
It was way overkill for they come in for us, 80 people in the plaza, and they had over 100 officers just in the front lines.
San Diego, 50 arrested in that midnight sweep.
These are your own people! Why are you here? These are your people!
And you can't stop the stupid. Nobody can stop the stupid.
Ms. Kate, is there anything else you say to the Wall Street protesters? Yeah, go home and get a job.
Funny, isn't that what his fake campaign is for? To get him a life and get him a job in the political whorehouse that is Fox News? What does the president know, and when will he start knowing it? Occupy and the White House.
The president has said that he understands people's frustrations.
Occupy Day 42 with Scott Olsen's roommate Keith Shannon, with New York One's Errol Louis, and with witnesses to the events in Oakland, in Nashville, in San Diego, and with this idiot mocking Sergeant Shamar Thomas.
The video shows this Marine yelling at the police, "You gotta stop brutalizing, we're unarmed!"
And you've probably seen them online, and your jaw has probably dropped accordingly. The story behind worst costumes ever. All that and more now on Countdown.
Now give me some candy!
Good evening from New York. This is Friday, October 28th, 375 days until the 2012 presidential election. Physicians are reporting tonight that the Marine Iraq veteran whose skull was fractured, apparently by an Oakland police gas canister, has incurred mild brain damage. However, they expect he will likely make a full recovery. The fifth story on the Countdown, police repression continuing to work for Occupy, not against it. Oakland Mayor Jean Quan has apologized for the police violence that drove Occupy from Frank Ogawa Plaza, even as she may have prepared the ground for another confrontation with its protesters. But first, the Scott Olsen story. The Occupy protesters in Oakland and other cities held vigils for Mr. Olsen last night. The blow to his forehead that fractured Olsen's skull above his brain's speech center. Though Dr. Alden Harkin, the chief surgeon at Oakland's Highland Hospital, says that while Olsen can't speak at this time,
He actually can communicate, he can make signs, he can write. He clearly understands what we're saying. Huge neurological improvement over what he was when he got here. But he's still having trouble articulating words. I anticipate that will improve.
I'll get the latest in a few moments from Keith Shannon, Scott's roommate, and like Scott, a former Marine who served in Iraq. And while Scott Olsen's prognosis is improving, Oakland Mayor Kwan's relations with Occupy protesters seem unlikely to do the same. The mayor was booed relentlessly last night when she tried to address Occupy Oakland's General Assembly. After fleeing back to her office, the mayor recorded a statement posted to her Facebook page apologizing for Tuesday's attack.
What I wanted to say to you tonight is how deeply saddened I am about the outcome on Tuesday. It's not what anyone hoped for. I understand it's my responsibility, and I want to apologize to everyone about what happened.
The mayor also had 4 requests for Occupy Oakland. 1, communicate with city officials. 2, maintain healthy and safe conditions in the plaza. 3, provide access for public safety employees in case of emergency. But 4,
we're asking you again not to camp overnight. Frank Ogawa Plaza is open for free speech activities between 6 a.m. and 10 p.m.
That condition, of course, is what triggered Tuesday's police action, in which more than 100 were arrested and Scott Olsen was badly hurt. Though Kwan's office now says that protesters who stayed past 10 would more likely to be cited than arrested. Well, in Frank-Ogawa Plaza, Occupy protesters seemed unimpressed by the mayor's offers and the police violence that briefly expelled them.
All it did was galvanize the public. Just more fuel for the fire for the people.
And reinforcements have arrived. Filmmaker and activist Michael Moore has arrived in Oakland and rallied protesters in Frank-Ogawa Plaza.
This movement has killed apathy. People have got up off the sofa. They've turned off Dancing with the Stars. And they're out in the streets. This is a victory.
Elsewhere in the Occupy movement in Nashville, 29 protesters were arrested early this morning at Legislative Plaza after the Tennessee Department of Public Safety rewrote state policy on Thursday and closed the area from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Tonight, the protesters are back and claiming victory. More on Occupy Nashville a little later in the program. In San Diego, at least 50 arrests last night at the Civic Center Plaza after the protest was declared an unlawful assembly. In Atlanta, protesters expelled from Woodruff Park made a temporary camp last night at the Martin Luther King Jr. National Historic Site near King's historic Ebenezer Baptist Church. Occupy Atlanta left the King Historic Site this morning, returned briefly to Woodruff Park, and now seems divided on where to go next. The movement did get support today from one of its inspirations, along with the criticism of a clown. Egyptian activists marched from Tahrir Square in Cairo to the U.S. Embassy in that city to show solidarity with Occupy protesters here, while GOP presidential candidate Herman Cain showed the opposite in an Arkansas campaign appearance.
Go home and get a job.
If only Mr. Cain realized his party had made sure there were no jobs to get, and if only he had received the report released today by the Bertelsmann Foundation, which showed the U.S. ranks 27th out of 31 nations in Bertelsmann's Social Justice Index, which measures, among other things, the ability to improve your situation by getting a better job or any job at all. Countries ranking below the U.S., Greece, Chile, Mexico, and Turkey. Let's go to Occupy Oakland, or the environs at least. And for the latest on Scott Olsen, I'm joined again by his roommate, fellow Marine veteran and activist in Iraq, Veterans Against the War, Keith Shannon. Keith, thanks for your time tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Were you in the hospital today?
I was this morning, and I had to go to work all day.
Did you get to see him?
No. Unfortunately, the doctors are not letting me in, even though Scott and his parents have asked them to let me.
What are you hearing about, we heard the clip from the doctor before, what are you hearing about his communication skills and the doctor's hopes for his recovery?
They have high hopes for it. I talked to his dad right before I came over here, and a speech therapist was on his way in to start working with Scott on that.
So it's a rebuild process as opposed to something that's that is going to require surgery. Has surgery been ruled out yet?
I don't believe it's been ruled out, although I believe it's not as likely as it was before.
Good. How are you mentioned his parents? How are they holding up?
They seem to be doing well. I haven't talked to them very much because they're not allowed to be on the cell phone in the room with him, so they have to go outside in order to talk to me. But they seem to be doing pretty well. They're obviously still worried, but happy that he's doing better. His sister has also arrived today and is in there with him.
Do you know, was he awake? Was he up from the sedation already yesterday when Mayor Kwan came to the hospital to apologize?
I didn't get the chance to ask him about that yet, so I'm still wanting to get details on that as well.
Do you know, is he aware of the vigils and the other support around the country?
I told his parents about it last night. I'm sure they passed it on to him. I don't know if he knows the extent of it, but I'm sure he knows about them.
Now, have you been back to Frank-Ogawa Plaza?
I went there yesterday for the vigil. I was one of the people that talked along with some other Iraq Veterans Against the War members at his vigil.
So what do you think is next for the protest movement after the sort of farce that it turned into last night? Not the protest, but Mayor Kwan's attempt to go and talk to Occupy Oakland.
I think it's just going to keep growing. I mean, you can't put business hours on free speech or your right to protest. So I think more and more people are going to show up, and the more they try to shut it down, the bigger it's going to get.
And the idea of not being able to be there overnight, is this being taken seriously?
No, they already had tents set up. I don't think anybody's going to leave.
Keith Shannon, Scott Olsen's roommate, fellow Marine veteran and activist in Iraq Veterans Against the War. Many thanks for coming on the program.
Thanks, Ken.
All right. In New York, it's not cracked skulls, but smears spread and generators seized the subtler but no less mean-spirited attempts to shut down Occupy Wall Street. Next on Countdown. He prophesied that Occupy Wall Street might not last past the first frost. This morning, he and his city tried to hurry that up by seizing the protesters' generators. Other cities also do the right thing for Occupy by doing the wrong thing public relations-wise. How Nashville, Tennessee changed the rules on the occupiers yesterday, then raided them last night. We need an 8th grade teacher arrested as one of his own students watched. His press secretary says the president fully understands the frustration of those in Occupy. Does he? Tim Dickinson of Rolling Stone with an assessment. And it will go down as one of the great quotes from any politician in any country in any century. Don't you effing know I'm Rob effing Ford, the mayor of this city. The context coming up on Countdown. The mayor of the city of New York had predicted that Occupy Wall Street would eventually peter out, in large part because of the oncoming autumn and winter weather. In our fourth story on the Countdown, as temperatures dropped into the 40s, the city decided to give Mother Nature a little help by confiscating the group's generators and by spreading rumors that parts of Zuccotti Park were so dangerous even police couldn't go there. Zuccotti Park covers only about 3/5 of 1 acre. OWS with twin marches this afternoon to 5 different banks, several hundred participants, no arrests.
You broke the law, now go to jail. Our country is too big to fail.
One man dressed as a pirate, perhaps representing the spirit of the financial industry or just getting ready for Halloween Monday.
Far, far, far too long, the banks have been playing an unfair game. And so we're here to ask the bankers to actually pay their fair share. Otherwise, they're going to have to walk the plank.
Any metaphoric planks were walked in the morning when the New York Fire Department and the police department removed several generators and fuel from Zuccotti Park.
Concerns First Amendment and safety.
Not everyone was buying that explanation, however.
This wasn't about public safety. This is pretty obvious that they're just trying to hit us where it hurts.
Another dubious assertion came in a New York Daily News story in which an anonymous police source claimed that there is fighting in the park in a section the protesters call the ghetto. Other anonymous police sources said they'd been warned about mysterious, dangerous instruments concealed in cardboard tubing, possibly an oboe. Joined now by Errol Louis, the political anchor for New York One News, co-editor of Deadline Artists, and host of New York One's Inside City Hall. Thanks for coming down again,
Good
sir.
to see you.
All right, removing the generators, it sounds like a plausible enough act that there might be some fire hazard or something like that, but it occurred to me, aren't there like a dozen outdoor outfitted tents and walkways and such for shows and beauty things and sports pageants and everything else every day in the autumn and the winter in the city?
Fashion Week, the red carpets and movie openings, on and on and on it goes. Yes, sir. So, on the other hand, I have heard that there's some kind of a standard around 20 feet around a propane heater to make sure that it's safe and so forth. So it was at least plausible. Of course, there have been conflicting reports. Some of the protesters have tweeted and talked about on camera that they had a vegetable oil was being used to fuel it, not propane, no gasoline or anything like that. So unclear what the heck was going on.
Well, you think the mayor would have been happy because of the low fat content of the oil being used. It's one of his pet peeves. If there's no salt in the thing, he might come down and give somebody a medal. But does it seem to you, though, that every step that the mayor takes or the police department or even the fire department takes, that the protesters seem to have game planned this a little bit better than what we're used to in these environments? Because what I'm understanding is they are talking about bringing in bicycle run generators, and of course that would then they'll also issue address the heat problem for the individuals who are on the bicycles. I mean, they've really got it thought through.
It's true. Well, it is in fact. Well, they're very resourceful. Let's put it that way.
That's a good way to put it.
The generators, by the way, don't appear to have been used for heat. This was the very first day that the temperature really dropped below 40 degrees. And apparently, up until now, it's really been used to power their very impressive communication setup.
Right.
So now they've got an issue, I think, more about communication than around personal comfort. But look, the reality is the mayor and the city and a lot of scornful onlookers have just assumed that, oh, they'll all go away when the cold. Well, you know, they don't know why they started. They don't know why they're there. I don't think they can make any intelligent predictions about why they might leave or when.
Michael Moore suggested last night that there were no ordinances about ice sculpting in the city, and therefore igloos were a distinct possibility. And there was an ice company that apparently had volunteered to provide the ice for igloos.
Oh,
that's how prepared they might be at this point. The tent issue, the mayor says they can keep them up unless the company that owns or controls the spot wants them to be taken down. Is that a win for the protesters, or is that just another past buck?
It sounds like a past buck, frankly, but this was the same reason the mayor deferred when it came to the question of clearing them all out for allegedly sanitation reasons. The sanitation ordinances and standards were public, but again, this is a private park. And so the mayor said, well, we'll defer to whatever it is, Brookfield Properties, they own the space, whatever it is they want to do. And it's caused a lot of rage, by the way, on the right, where they say, look, he's giving in, he's passing the buck. Could you imagine Rudy Giuliani, taking a back seat to some private company and so forth? And frankly, it is a little bit unclear as to who's calling the shots here. It seems, though, that the mayor is, in fact, deferring to the private owner.
In the area in which he does not defer to them, he said New York police do not use tear gas the way they did in Oakland. Is that a promise? Is this a suggestion that New York learned something from what happened in Oakland?
It sounds more like a coincidence, frankly. I'm trying to think. In fact, over the last 20, 30 years, I've been watching New York politics fairly closely. I don't think they use tear gas. I think it's really just a reality of New York. I mean, we've got 8 million people in 322 square miles. You can't use something like tear gas without affecting a whole lot of people.
Wind changes, it's running up Broadway and hitting 72nd Street, and then you're going to hear complaints.
Unless you, for some reason, wanted to subdue everybody in Yankee Stadium, I can't foresee a scenario where you would ever use tear gas in New York.
One of the descriptions of how the police behaved the other night when the protesters actually got onto the streets for the first time without permits was, it was Shamar Thomas who told me this, that it was not, as it might have appeared, the police backing off, but the police actually being failing in terms of tactics, actually being outmaneuvered on the street. And at one point, the protesters managed to go against traffic, so there was no way to put up the netting to stop them. They would have been interfering with the traffic. Is it your sense that the police have not calmed down at all, but just have not succeeded in doing the way, approaching this the way they approached it on September 18th and September 25th and all the other key dates?
You and I have talked about how demonstrations in New York City tend to be somewhat choreographed, somewhat staged. The organizers and the police sort of collaborate and agree in advance where the arrests will take place, how many will be arrested, which streets will be off limits, on limits, who will be on the sidewalk, who will be in the street. These folks are not doing that kind of choreography. They're going in all kinds of other places. Tactically, for the police, it's a very, very difficult kind of situation. And when people do the unexpected or do things that are unannounced or split into two marches that the police have not anticipated, it becomes very hard for them to perform the way they normally do, basically without incident. The fact that there were no arrests today, though, is a sign that everybody's kind of giving a little and adjusting to what seems to be a new style of protest in the city.
Or the splitting of the march, it seems to have been perhaps something taken from the playbook of Robert E. Lee, and they're not used to it in the New York Police Department. The last point, the anonymous police sources who told the Daily News that the dangerous ghetto in Zuccotti Park and the mysterious weapons inside the cardboard tubes. As I said, this place is 3/5 of an acre. This is not some vast Central Park-like area. People say, oh, Zuccotti Park, you get down there, you can see it all. You don't stand up on your toes. You can see the whole thing.
You can see the whole thing.
Where there's a ghetto? Is there a subway? Are there two subway stops that travel from one end to the other? What in the hell is that story, Errol?
I don't know. And the notion that there are different, sort of sectors within, again, what you say, a very, very small area. You can walk the whole length of it in under a minute.
Yes.
I mean, it's just not the kind of place where... I think there's a reason that certain sources remain anonymous because their information wouldn't really stand up to any kind of serious scrutiny. This might be one of those kind of statements.
I've been to baseball card shows in basements in this city that are like 6 times the size of this. Errol Louis of New York One, co-editor of Deadline Artists. Much thanks and have a great weekend.
Good to see you.
Thank you, sir. The ultimate raid that OWS has feared since September 17th already hit Occupy San Diego and Occupy Nashville last night. One of the Nashville protesters, an 8th grade teacher, joins me next. Every time it looks like municipalities and police forces will calm down, think big picture, and let the Occupy movement either level off or grow of its own accord, they instead play right into the protests' publicity hands. In our third story, 29 occupiers were arrested in Nashville overnight. Doesn't sound like anything different. But even though the arrests themselves were relatively peaceful, the justification for the arrests has been severely called into question. 9 a.m. Thursday, the Office of the General Counsel of the Department of General Services informed the members of Occupy Nashville that a new curfew had been enacted for the park during the hours of 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and eviction of the park could begin at 8 p.m. 8 p.m. came and went without incident, but at 3 a.m., an announcement came from a police bullhorn that in 10 minutes the police would be entering the park and any remaining occupiers would be arrested. Around 24 protesters left without incident. Another 29 remained. After 10 minutes, 75 state troopers began arresting the remaining occupiers. The occupiers linked arms in an attempt to peacefully resist, but they were eventually pulled apart anyway and arrested. brought to Davidson County Jail. Once there, the night court commissioner Tom Nelson refused to sign the warrants, citing a lack of probable cause.
I am not criticizing the Highway Patrol, but you have no lawful basis to arrest or charge those people. For 3 weeks, they've sat up there and protested under no admonition whatsoever that they're violating state policy with regard to camping out on Legislative Plaza or that they're committing a crime. When the state issued its memorandum today imposing a curfew and changing the rules right in the middle of a protest, they can do that. But they have to give them adequate opportunity to comply with those rules.
Let's hear it from Mr. Nelson and the Constitution. Instead of being released, the protesters were moved to the sheriff's office where they were issued misdemeanor citations for criminal trespass. That is a Class C misdemeanor. They were released at 9 o'clock this morning, 24 hours after they were first informed of that new curfew. Joining me now is one of the Occupy Nashville members arrested last night, 8th grade teacher Adam Knight. Mr. Knight, thanks for your time tonight.
Hey, thank you, Keith.
Were you surprised the police moved in? Did you think that at least they give you 24 hours or sometimes to adjust to this new curfew setup?
Honestly, I was surprised that they didn't move in earlier. They said that they were going to give us until tomorrow. That was their language. So tomorrow, to me, was 12 o'clock midnight. So I presumed that they would move in at 12:01 and take us out, but they waited until 3.
The response that we just played at the office of the night court commissioner, has that been the highlight of this experience for you, to hear him say that?
I mean, it's good to see that we have that legal backing. I mean, he claimed that there was no legal basis for them to arrest or detain us. After he made that decision, they held us for another 4 hours in holding cells, and then they moved us into a parking garage. So we were held there.
I said this at the beginning of the segment. Every time it looks like the municipalities and the police, no matter where we're talking about, whether it's Nashville or Oakland, every time it looks like they're settling down and appreciating what it is you're doing, what it is you're trying to do for them in particular, that somebody gets the bright idea that this thing can be stopped by force or by midnight raids or whatever you have. Is that your sense, too, that every step that somebody takes in government against you, in fact, works not just to galvanize those who are involved in the protest, but also really bring it to the public's attention that the wrong end of the equation here is the government's end of it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think galvanize is a good word. The poll in the Tennessean yesterday asking whether people believe that Occupy Nashville should be evicted from Legislative Plaza, it was overwhelmingly against eviction. 84% of people voting, claim that we should be allowed to stay there. So yeah, it galvanizes us, and it brings more people in, because when governments start attacking the Constitution, that's always going to bring people.
Isn't it shocking to realize how many people think that the Constitution is meant to be interpreted as it is written for things like, say, protest, and how many people don't realize that there's been any kind of erosion about this? And we're not just talking about liberals or members of Occupy, but just anybody in the political equation who just sort of hangs around at the edges is suddenly discovering, guess what's happened to your rights in the last 30 years?
Oh, right. I mean, it's been beautiful just to even have that conversation started again, and to have people really willing to stand up and come out. We had people come out last night that hadn't been out before, and we welcomed them with open arms. They found out what we were about, and they're there to stand for something. And just like I saw Michael Moore say earlier on the clip that you played, they're not looking at Dancing with the Stars anymore. They see that. Democracy has to be fought for, and you have to stand up for your constitutional rights, and people are finally willing to wake up to that fact again.
I understand one of your own students was present last night during that arrest. How have your students and their parents reacted to your involvement in Occupy Nashville and the movement overall?
Well, it's been heartwarming to me. I told my students before I went out there Thursday that there was a good chance that I would be arrested, and I didn't want them to think that I was doing something wrong if they heard that Mr. Knight had been arrested, So my student came out, and his parents were there, and his father told me, thank you for teaching my son to stand up for what's right, and that was fantastic to me. They stayed there right until the bitter end. You know, as we were sitting down, locking arms, the police started to come to get us. I see all three of them as they're walking away saying thank you, you know, and that's beautiful. I went, after I got out this morning, I went to school, and I saw all my kids. You know, they were watching me on live stream last night. A little too late at 10:30. I told them you need to be in bed and doing your homework. But you know, I was met, and it was beautiful today. You know, I mean, it was really fantastic to see those kids, because I try and tell them all the time that in 4 years they're going to be 18 and in this world. You know, so they kind of have to start realizing what's going on, and they're not teaching that on the Jersey Shore.
What happens next for Occupy Nashville relative to Legislative Plaza and the rest of the protest?
You know, we're going to move forward. We're going to stay at Legislative Plaza. When we got released today, we marched right back up to Legislative Plaza, and that's where we intend to stay. You know, Governor Bill Haslam has said that he will send out state troopers again tonight, and if he does that, you know, we're prepared to be there.
Adam Knight, the 8th grade teacher, member of Occupy Nashville, indeed teaching his students in a way that most teachers don't get a chance to, but perhaps should. Great, thanks for your time and for what you did. Take care.
Hey, it's my pleasure, Keith. Thank you.
The occupiers are, of course, comic to some on the right. How one of conservatism's most notorious fools has dismissed Sergeant Shamar Thomas. Ahead here on Countdown. Countdown, the longest continuously running 8 p.m. program on cable news, unless you think Fox is news. We're live weeknights at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 Pacific. Primary replays at 11 p.m., 11 p.m. Eastern and Pacific. We call it our little PowerPoint presentation. The mayor of the 5th largest city on this continent calls 911 and swears at the dispatcher because a satirical TV news reporter in a big red ballroom gown managed to stake him out outside his house. Coming up. First, the sanity break, and on this date in 1886, the Statue of Liberty was dedicated in New York Harbor and opened to the public for the first time. Well, the first time there. The arm and torch had been in the country for a decade, while a disinterested government and public failed to pull enough money together to put it anywhere except for 6 years in the middle of New York's Madison Square Park, where it was sometimes mistaken for an advertisement for a torch factory. Time marches on. We begin with the age-old question, why did the chicken cross the road? Or rather, how did the chicken cross the road? The answer on the back of a tortoise. Because if you're looking to get somewhere quickly, why not travel on the back of one of the slowest animals known to man? As far as that whole which came first, the chicken or the egg thing, let's just say the egg was traveling by a hair. The internet's this stunt biker is showing off his cool wheelie trick. Pretty cool moves. I'm sure the many fans gathered around watching agree. The only time this guy runs into his problem is when he has to ride his bike like a normal person, and boom goes the dynamite. That fence was like that when I got here, right? Finally, we end as we always do, doing the giant arachnid made up entirely out of balloons. This time-lapse video shows the construction of the world-renowned balloon artist Adam Lee's latest creation. Made of nearly 3,000 balloons, the world record-setting art piece measures over 44 feet wide. If the balloons used to make the spider were stretched out end-to-end for some reason, it would measure nearly 2.5 miles long, but really, who has the time to line up so many balloons, and what would the point be? When the piece was all finished, Mr. Lee attached it to his house, and he floated away along with a Boy Scout and a talking dog. Time marches on. It's a remake of the Wild West. Speaking of boys in uniforms, you've seen this, right? World War II evacuee costume. Bet you've wondered what everybody else has wondered. What the hell? We have procured an explanation. It is coming up in Worst Persons. Once again, the White House insists the president fully understands the frustration of the Occupy protesters, and yet his support has been tepid, and his willingness to even use the political energy it could give him reluctant at best. Trick or what the? Yes, you're right. These are the worst Halloween costumes ever. Turns out there is a slight mitigation factor to the backstory. It could be yours in Worst Persons next. Occupy Wall Street. Is any of it actually sinking in at the White House? Next. First, because sinking is all these next folks do. Here are Countdown's top 3 nominees for today's Worst Persons in the World. Our bronze to disgraced ex-TV host Lonesome Rhodes Beck. He's still on the radio, but his tone-deaf inhumanity has finally been shunted off to a subscription service, a switch which has cost him 90% of his viewers. Here's why. Beck decided to mock Shamar Thomas, the man in this famous Occupy Wall Street video calling out the consciences of the NYPD officers who were treating a peaceful protest like a terrorist attack. Who's wrong here? In Beck's drug-addled brain, of course, it's Shamar Thomas.
the guy who was like, "There's no honor in this.
Oh, the
These
Marines
people
supposedly
are unarmed. There's no honor in this." And I'm watching that, and I couldn't take it anymore because the video shows this Marine yelling at the police, "You gotta stop brutalizing. We're unarmed." And the cops all have their hands in their pockets.
They're not doing anything.
They're their hands in their pockets. They're like, we know. We're standing here.
Just remember, because you quit using drugs, it doesn't mean the brain goes back to what it was before you started using drugs. To Mr. Beck, it does not matter that Shamar Thomas served this country in the Marines in Iraq, as his father and mother and stepfather and grandfather served this country. Shamar Thomas is a Marine. He was honorably discharged. He's actually seen brutality, not just opined about it from a basement studio. And to Glenn Beck, he's a guy. So to raise an old question, why does this fop Glenn Beck hate the troops? Our runners-up, Wonderland Party, which makes Halloween costumes, which are sold in England via Amazon UK. Now, to be fair, British parents recently received a note that their young children need to be taught to empathize with other kids in different times in England's past, and the teachers thought that the best way for a 5 or 6-year-old to empathize is to dress up as those kids. So the schools have been holding days in which everybody dresses up as a London child during the Roman era. Well, that's a sheet. Or as a Victorian British kid, or as a World War II evacuee when London and the other major cities sent their kids to the countryside or even abroad during the German Blitz. Nevertheless, worst Halloween costume ever. And the price is £15. Oh wait, one more. Now again, to be fair, this is meant to be London 1940, not occupied Poland 1939, but still. Also, the Velcro shoes completely ruin the historical effect. But for our winner, we go international. Mayor Rob Ford of Toronto, the Canadian one. The new Conservative executive has had a rough start, but never was it rougher than Monday. There's a CBC television comedy show called This Hour Has 22 Minutes, and it featured a character played by actress Mary Walsh called Marg Delahunty. And in the simpler, fewer guns drawn land to the north, Marg was able to come out of her retirement to ambush interview the mayor outside his house.
Mayor Ford, it's me, Marg Delahunty. You know, I gave up all the old Princess Warrior stuff.
Can I go
but
to my
no,
car, please?
Can
I
Mayor
go to my car,
Ford,
please?
I came up to give you a hand, honey. Because I gave up the Princess Warrior stuff, but when I saw what was happening to you...
Whoa, can I go to my car?
Oh, Mayor Ford, please. I came all the way from Newfoundland to talk to you, honey. One good thing about being stubborn, though, Mayor Ford, is you always know what you're going to be thinking the next day. God love you. Take care of yourself now. Didn't go that good, did it?
Well, a little crash, a little stuttering John-ish, but what the hell? When Mayor Ford got inside his house, he called 911 and swore at the dispatcher because the police were not getting there fast enough. The police were the classic, if I offended anybody, I apologize, non-apology, apology. Ford has released this statement. When I made the 911 call, I was concerned and upset. I was repeatedly told police were arriving soon. In another call, I expressed frustration with the delay and said that I had to leave to go to City Hall. I did use the F word at some point as I expressed my frustration with the situation. After being attacked in my driveway, I hope I can be excused for saying the F word. I never called anyone any names. I apologize for expressing my frustration inappropriately. Concerned and upset by a fake news reporter in a red ballroom gown. That, of course, is his version. It's bad and panicky and stupid enough, but CBC's very good news department quoted sources that indicate the mayor's actual comment to the dispatcher was, well, the quote may actually be worse than this, but it appears he said at least the following. Don't you effing know? I'm Rob effing Ford, the mayor of this city. Toronto's Rob effing Ford, the mayor of this effing city, today's effing worst person in the effing world. Tens of thousands of Americans now raising their voices in protest, but it's still not clear how much anybody at the White House is listening to them. And our number one story in the countdown, even as the administration sticks to its position that the president, quote, hears the frustrations of the Occupy protesters, President Obama is still giving no indication he actually supports them. White House Press Secretary Jay Carney today even avoided giving a substantive response to reports of police brutality against protesters.
With regard to the situation in Oakland, this is a local law enforcement issue. I would note that the police are investigating that incident, so I don't really have much more to say about that in particular.
Wow, take a stance. Carney following that non-answer with another non-answer, saying predictably that the president understands Americans' frustrations, and then claiming those frustrations are actually directed towards Congress.
The frustration that is demonstrated by the people who are out there is something the President fully understands, and it goes to the heart of what we've been discussing today and what we've been discussing frequently here about persistently high unemployment, about growth that's too slow, and about the dysfunctionality of Congress, the fact that Congress won't take action.
The president has, of course, had trouble getting Congress to even look at the jobs plan in seriousness. And this week, he signed a series of jobs-related executive orders, including one to relieve student loan debt. Those orders do seem to be in line with many of the protesters' demands. But in making these moves, the president made absolutely no mention of that when he signed them. The only time the president has actually spoken about the Occupy movement was in an interview with ABC News 10 days ago when he said, no surprise, that he understands people's frustration. And showing how little he perhaps actually understands it, he compared the movement to the Tea Party.
What I've said is that I understand the frustrations that are being expressed in those protests. In some ways, they're not that different from some of the protests that we saw coming from the Tea Party.
Joining me now, Tim Dickinson, national political correspondent for Rolling Stone. Tim, thanks for your time tonight.
Good to be with you.
The president seems hesitant to indicate even the smallest amount of support for what seems to be something right in his wheelhouse, even politically. Is there an explanation for that? Is there some sense that it's going to come at some point in the future?
Well, I think the Occupy Wall Street movement must have surprised the White House to some degree, because this is, after all, the president who built his own movement and was elected on the back of it. And he's put it on the shelf for several years, and I think wanted to bring it back into action to fight for his jobs bill. But the people took to the street on their own with a much more ambitious agenda and don't seem to be all that interested in his sort of worthy but insufficient jobs bill. They want jailed bankers. They want real government action. And so I think the White House is playing this cautiously, in part because they don't quite know what to make of it yet. I don't think any of us really do know how much larger it's going to get, whether, where this thing brooks. I think in part it's interesting. I think the initial response you heard there from the president is a little like the Tea Party, is sort of more characteristic Obama on the one hand, on the other hand, I'm going to play to the center. This week we've really seen the president sort of move into the political space that this movement is starting to create. We're not talking about the deficit nearly as much, and we're actually talking about student debt and some issues that are important, housing crisis that the administration has so far fumbled. So.
Funny though that it wasn't the president who moved us into that space. It was several tens of thousands of protesters. I want to reread the Jay Carney quote for a second about Oakland. This is a local law enforcement issue. I would note that the police are investigating the incident, so I don't really have much more to say about that in particular. I was flashed back this afternoon to 2 years ago on the Henry Louis Gates story, the Harvard professor caught breaking into his own home. Now you've got political protest with widespread public support of it, and they're tossing it off. They can't say anything because it's a local law enforcement issue. I mean, this has been going on for 6 weeks. The first violence was about 5.5 weeks in, and this is still something they think is radioactive politically?
It's troubling and puzzling that the president can have such moral clarity about the protests in Tahrir Square and their right of peaceful assembly. But when it comes to people being tear gassed in wheelchairs and shot in the head with tear gas canisters and people gathering around a wounded woman to tend to her injuries, getting flashbang grenaded, that the president can't seem to sort of muster any moral outrage there. So it's puzzling. The president is still, obviously, I think, snake-bit just by that Henry Louis Gates incident, where he, I don't think he's going to want to have the entire OPD over for a beer summit. But
again, there was something of a ratio there. If he had waited 6 days before commenting on that, they probably could have gotten all the information in place and done it in a much more diplomatic fashion than clearly he did. He's waited 6 weeks on this. The other part of it I don't understand, Tim, is just for the political cover for the jobs bill, you would think he would throw these people a bone, wouldn't he?
Right. No, I think there's a real danger that this movement splits off from Obama and doesn't back him. I mean, this is we're seeing all the strands of energy and excitement, all the anger and hope for change apart from Obama. And I think in some ways this is a good thing. The left is no longer domesticated as it wasn't Henry Louis Gates, but another gentleman said. But so I think there's a danger that they lose contact with this movement. And so I think the president needs to follow them cautiously in a certain sense. You know, this is too young a movement to get too far out in front of. There are some fringe elements involved, and he could end up looking silly. But I think he needs to be cautious to not lose contact with this movement.
As if tomorrow they have a 6-week lead on him. That he's not going to get out in front of them. So ultimately, what will it take to get the president off his ass on Occupy?
You know, honestly, I think it's going to take something like one of these policemen taking off their helmet and putting down the tear gas canister and getting on the other side of the barricade. I think that's when we're going to start to see real change and movement on this front. And once this becomes a more broad-based and more popular, not so readily identified as a left movement, but a more mainstream movement.
Well, all right, but the likelihood that it gets more mainstream as opposed to going in the other direction seems to me to be small. So is the conclusion here to be drawn that the president and the White House are just going to stand on the sidelines about this to the 2012 elections?
You know, I don't think so. I think if the people lead, the president will follow, and I think we've seen some of that this week, even with these cautious steps in terms of these executive orders.
Was I living in another country when it used to be the other way around, with the president leading often and the you know, or is that just like a pipe dream of mine?
I think that may be a pipe dream, especially with this president. I mean, I think we know him well enough now that he's not the leader of a mass movement. He's a cautious centrist who wants to, you know, cater to mainstream, down the middle America.
Yeah. Who was that guy who always used to rally his base? What was that guy's name? Bush. That's right. Tim Dickinson of Rolling Stone magazine. Thanks as ever, Tim. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.
That's countdown for this, the 297th day since the Republicans took control of the House, 297 days without them having passed one jobs bill of any kind. I'm Keith Olbermann. Good night and good luck.